Good morning. This is April 24th, 2022. My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Sunday school class. We've been going through the book of Exodus. We started just last week. Um, and we're going to go verse by verse through it. We feel like it's a better way to read the scriptures and to learn and to really get the true meaning of what's going on if you go verse by verse in context. It just Bible makes more sense that way to me. Um, we are starting with Exodus chapter 2. Um, the last verse we read last week from Exodus chapter 1, the last verse of Exodus chapter 1 says, So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, Every son who is born, talking about the Jews, you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So, to recap, the children of Israel, Jacob's name is Israel. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. God changed Jacob's name to Israel. His children, his 12 sons, were all in Egypt by their own choice. They came down there, they got food, and then they stayed for 70 years on their own choice. Their brother Joseph was vizier, uh, vice president Pharaoh in Egypt, and so they stayed. And he was 40 years old when they came down, and he died at 110. So for 70 years, their brother's like the head guy in Egypt. So they're choosing to stay. No one is making them stay. No one is making them stay. They are choosing to stay. And then a new Pharaoh comes along who doesn't know Joseph. Joseph finally dies, and he starts putting restraints on them because they're growing so much. Now, it says that 70 sons and grandchildren showed up. Each son has a household of at least 50 to 100 servants. Abraham had 300 servants. Um, and his was passed on to Isaac, which grew, and his was passed on to Jacob, which grew, and Jacob's was passed on to his sons. And so there could be 7,000 people who migrated down, 70 sons and grandchildren. But there was a huge mob. And that, after 70 more years, is just multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. So that Pharaoh says, they're getting too big, they're going to be dangerous, they're going to take over, we got to do something about it. So his first plan was to tell the Hebrew midwives to kill the firstborn sons. I mean, the sons, like if there's a son, kill him. Midwives didn't do that. They said, oh, the Hebrew wives, they're not like the Egyptian mothers. The Hebrew mothers, they have babies so fast, by the time we get there, they're already born. So what are we going to do? So Pharaoh says, okay, after they're born, take them, cast them into the river. This is the Nile River he's talking about. And so the Nile River becomes a river of blood. Jewish boys are cast into the river. I'm just saying this because later, when God sends the plague on Israel and the Nile River is turned into blood, he's showing Pharaoh, this is what you did. I'm giving you back what you did. And God will do that. Whatever you reap what you sow. So if you're plotting against people all the time, you get plotted against. If you're kind to people all the time, people will be kind back to you. So you reap what you sow. So Pharaoh sowed that and he reaped it later. So every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter, though, you shall save alive. So Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. That's where we're starting this week. It says, a man of the house of Levi went and took a daughter of Levi. So he's being anonymous on purpose. That's because Moses is helping to write this book of Exodus, and he is not wanting to draw attention to himself and to his parents. But these are the parents of Moses. So Levi had 3 sons. Oh, well, let me just read it here in Exodus chapter 6. Uh, Levi, who's one of Jacob's 12 sons, he had 3 sons. Kohath, um, Merari. I forget what the third one was. But anyway, in Exodus chapter 6, verse 18, it says, and the sons of Kohath, so this is Levi's son, Kohath, his middle son, were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. So Levi had Kohath, Kohath had Amram. It says, and the years of the lives of Kohath were 133. In verse 20 of Exodus chapter 6, it says, now Amram took for himself Yochabed, his father's sister, as a wife, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. So Levi shows up in Egypt. He has Kohath. Kohath has Amram. Amram has Moses and Aaron. So it's just 4 generations to get to Moses. The picture we get, again, they weren't there for 425 years. They're only there for 225 years, which is still a long time. But it's only 4 generations that they were there, and then Moses is born. He said in the years of the life of Amram were 137 years. Okay, so we know who the Levite was. It's a Levite married a Levite woman. Amram marries his father's sister. Now, the word sister could also be translated, it means relate, his father's relative. And so the translators have to decide, is that cousin? Is it sister? Same, there's a word that means son that could also mean grandson. And it's up to the translators to decide what that word is. There's a word that's translated cousin or uncle. So they think it was his father's sister. It could have been his father's cousin. I think it might be sister because of what happens later. But anyway, Numbers chapter 26, verse 59 says, the name of Amram's wife was Yochabed, the daughter of Levi. So she also was the tribe of Levi, right? Who was born to Levi in Egypt, and to Amram she bore Aaron and Moses and their sister Miriam. So Yochabed has 3 kids, Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. However, Miriam's the oldest, then Aaron, then Moses. So it might have been the sister, his father's sister, that Amram married. Yochabed might have been his aunt. I do know in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 12, it says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is near of kin to your father. So God has to quit doing that. So it may be referring back to Moses. Anyway, in Exodus chapter 7, verse 7, it says, Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. So he's just being born now, but Aaron is 3 years older than Moses. Aaron's 3 years older than Moses. In fact, and they died around the very same time. In Numbers chapter 33, verse 39, it says Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. And he's 123. So when Aaron's 123, Moses is 120. And so he died at 123. In Deuteronomy 34:7, it says Moses was 120 when he died. So they died at about the same time, within days of each other, because that generation, and 123, that's a great age. Hey, you made it to 120. You can go into heaven. That's not even a problem. So they, anyway, so they died around the same time because that entire generation passed away, because God said this generation will not enter the promised land. And we'll get into all that. So, Numbers. Okay, I'm good with that. So the woman conceived. So we know who the woman is. It's Yochabed. It's Moses's mom. She's already had Miriam. She's already had Aaron. Now she's having Moses. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. And this word could be translated beautiful. It could be translated, good morning, everybody. It could be translated good or special or charming. They translated it to beautiful. But she saw something was special about him. So she hid him 3 months. Now, she hid him for a couple reasons. All the newborn babies at this point when Moses is being born, it wasn't true when 3 years earlier when Aaron was being born. It wasn't true how many years before that when Miriam was born. But the time that Moses was born, you had to take all, if anybody heard a baby cry, if you were an Egyptian, you could hear, if you heard if you walked by, if you're just an Egyptian guard walking down the street or whatever, and you hear, you bring that house, you take the baby, throw it. So she hid the baby 3 months. This is significant because every time the baby cries, they have to stop it from crying. They have to quiet it. And so the baby's not able to express and cry because it's like, which started to build up something in Moses. I just want you to know that this baby never got a chance to cry um, and say, "Oh, I'm in pain," or I'm hungry." They just had to cry. So that is, when you're not able to express yourself, that does affect you. We'll see how it affects him. Um, in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23, it says, "By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents." So for 3 months, shh, shh, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, right? Because they saw he was a beautiful child. Again, this word translated beautiful, special, charming. They something's about this child. They could already tell that there's something about this child. Not all the parents thought, "Oh, my child's wonderful," of course. But the scriptures is pointing out there's something special that they thought about this child when he was born. And there was not some prophecy saying, "And the deliverer shall come." They just thought there's something special, and the scripture's pointing this out about this child. It says, "And they were not afraid of the king's command, because they were to be punished for hiding the child. But they like, nope, we're going to go ahead and, because there's something special." Again, all parents, you're assuming, are doing something like this, but babies are dying. Moses is saved. Acts chapter 7, verse 20 says, "At this time Moses was born and was well pleasing to God. And he was brought up in his father's house for 3 months." So when Stephen is preaching and telling the whole story of deliverance and how it led to Christ, he uses the word well pleasing. There's something that they saw in this child that they knew God had something. We're going to have to go through special measures to make sure this child stays alive. Exodus chapter 2, verse 3. "But when she could no longer hide him after 3 months, she took an ark of bulrushes for him." So she creates this cradle, this ark, like Noah's ark, except obviously just 3 feet. And she daubed it with asphalt and pitch, right? That's what they had she takes the bulrushes and she sticks it all together, right? She put the child in it and she laid it by the reeds in the riverbank. So she just puts it in the water. This is equivalent to, there's a phenomenon in the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, where babies were being left at churches, on the steps of a church or at a fire station. And you just hope. You're just leaving your child. Okay, I'm just going to put him in the Nile River. See what happens. That's a pretty bold move and scary. Because God, nowhere says, and God said, put them in the ark. This is her choice. I've got to save this baby, so I'm just going to put him in the ark and just put him out in the river and see what happens. So I don't think you would do that. I don't think you would just take your baby, put him in a little tiny carriage and just put him in the river and, okay, let's see what happens. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 14, as far as this ark, this is an interesting thing because, again, the river is now a place of judgment. The river, and now it's Pharaoh's judgment. It's Pharaoh's vengeance. It's Pharaoh's, we're going to kill these young Hebrew boys and throw them into the river. So that's what it is. And this ark is floating on the river while all this death is around, right? It's similar to Genesis chapter 6, verse 14, when God says to Noah, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch." Kind of the same thing, except, of course, his ark was big enough, it was a football field long. But there's judgment in the water, and you're going to float above it. In Exodus chapter 25, verse 10, it says, "They shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits. This is the ark of the covenant. A cubit and a half its width, and a cubit and a half its height." And they're putting into it uh, the 10 Commandments. So the people have been judged, right? The earth opened up and swallowed them. was it, then there's Aaron rods that bud. That was another time that they challenged Aaron, complaining, and so judgment's happening all around. But you're going to put in the ark the rod, the Ten Commandments, the manna, and so it's floating above the judgment. And so Moses is that first type of that. And well, Noah is that it's this interesting type where God says, I save the righteous. So even though judgment's happening all around, the righteous can come into the ark. Genesis chapter 7, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. So even though judgment's can be going on all around you, God has an ark of safety for us. So Moses is put into this ark, floated on the river. It says, and his sister, this is Miriam, stood afar off to know what would be done of him. So she's the oldest. Then there is Aaron, then Moses, the baby Moses. Exodus chapter 15. Now, Miriam and Aaron had a special relationship. Know that they were raised together, Miriam and Aaron. First of all, they were together before Moses ever showed up. But Moses was only with him for 3 months and then taken away. He's brought back for a couple years and then taken away. And he grew up in a different household than they did. Miriam and Aaron had a special relationship. They grew up together. Moses grew up far from them. That's why in Exodus chapter 15, verse 20, when it says, then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with the timbrels and the dances. It doesn't say the sister of Moses. It says the sister of Aaron, which is really interesting because they had a special relationship. Miriam and Aaron, they grew up together. Moses was like a stranger to them because he didn't grow up in their household except for about maybe 18 months or so. Other than that, they grew up together for 40 years. Moses, they didn't even really see Moses again until he was 80 years old. They didn't really know Moses at all. That's why in Numbers chapter 12, verse 1, it says, then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman who he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. So they're angry at him for that. Miriam and Aaron often banded together against Moses because they have the relationship. They don't know Moses. Moses didn't grow up with them except for 18 months. The other 80 years of their life, they're not around Moses. So they often banded together to criticize Moses. It says, so they said, this is Numbers chapter 12, verse 2. So they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. I love this. And the Lord heard it. Okay. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who are on the face of the earth. The good news is that God hears everything. Stuff you mumbling in your hearts. God hears it, good or bad. Okay. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out here, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting. So the three came out. Let me holler at you for just a minute. So that's like, uh-oh, you in trouble, right? And then he talks to Aaron and Miriam, and how dare you talk against Moses, etc. But I'm just emphasizing that Miriam and Aaron had a special relationship. They're the oldest. They didn't really know Moses that well, which is why they often are banding together against him. So Moses is put in the ark that his mom made. He's missing all this judgment that's around him in the water. And the sister, Miriam, follows the ark just to see what's going to happen. Exodus chapter 2, verse 5 says, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. Now, this is kind of so God's, I guess, guiding this ark because they'd sectioned off a portion of the Nile River for the princess, the daughter of Pharaoh, to come and bathe with her maidens. This wasn't just, even though the river just went, all the way through Egypt, this part was sectioned off just for them. So the crazy people didn't just run and grab them, right? So the ark had to be kind of, God's guiding it at this point. and it makes it to Pharaoh's daughter. They see the ark. She sends her maids to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept, of course. So she had compassion on him. This baby's finally getting a chance to just cry out loud because every time it cried before, shh, don't cry. It stopped from crying, right? So now he's crying. Um, and she says, oh, this is one of the Hebrew children. Because she can see that he was the way that he was circumcised. It's not that the Egyptians didn't circumcise their children also, but they didn't circumcise it in the same way. So it was clear how this child was cut, that he's a Hebrew child. That's significant that we know that Moses is circumcised, because later on he refuses to circumcise his son, and God causes a big problem. But we'll get to there. Exodus chapter 2, verse 7. So then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, so this is Miriam, shall I go and call a nurse from you from the Hebrew women, that they may nurse the child for you? Because obviously this wasn't her child. She wasn't able to nurse it. I can go find one of the Hebrew women. I mean, it's a Hebrew baby. And I go, how, isn't this a coincidence? And I happen to be here. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, yes, go. So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Said, this is going to be perfect, because you sent the child out. It ended up with Pharaoh's daughter, and now you get to nurse it. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away, nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So she's being paid to be the mother to the child that she already is. Pharaoh's daughter has no idea this is his actual mother. She just think, oh, Hebrew women, they're always pregnant and they're just always able to nurse. So here, I'll pay you to do this. So it's great for her. I'm getting paid to do what I would have done naturally. So the woman took the child and nursed him. This is another 18 months. So he's already 3 months old. The scholars say that he would have been brought back at 2 years old. So I guess it's 21 months, right? She's already 3 and then 12. So for 21 months, he's back in their house. She's nursing him. At the age of 2, she brings him back. It says, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So now she's adopting him. So up from age 3 months to 2 years, he's in this Jewish home. But how much is he learning about Jewish culture at that point? Nothing, because he's just 2. So she takes him, and he becomes Egyptian. In fact, Acts chapter 27, verse 21 says, but when he set out, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son. So she brought him up as though he was an Egyptian prince. So he's getting all the education, learning everything there is to learn about the Egyptian culture. This is significant. I know some African-American kids who were adopted, let's say, by a white family. Let's say it's a rich white family in Beverly Hills. That's a specific culture that they're learning. They're growing up playing racquetball and listening to Mozart. I'm making this up, right? They're getting a Beverly Hills culture. They may have been from South Central, but they're totally learning polo and water polo and all these. They're learning a whole different culture. I've run into these African American kids who have trouble relating to the South. I'll call it South Central culture. They didn't grow up on rap music and all this stuff. They didn't. So that's not their culture. They know they're black, but when they come back into that culture, that's not how they were raised. They don't speak the same type of slang. They've had a totally different set of experiences, and so they feel alienated from that culture. So they do a couple different things, which we'll see that Moses did. Some of them, I've seen them become ultra. I'll become ultra African American. I'll wear dashikis, and I'll try to make up for the fact that I missed that whole thing. Or they just say, that's not me, sorry. And because that's not how they were raised. And so you can feel an alienation from your own culture if you're not raised in it. Moses is not raised Jewish, he's raised Egyptian. Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, the second part of verse 10 says, so she called his name Moses, saying, now Moses means he who draws out. Because I drew him out of the water. Since I drew him out of the water, I'm going to call him Moses. So it doesn't mean one who was drawn out. It means he who draws out. So Moses draws you out, right? That's how she felt led to call him, which he kind of does in several occasions. In Exodus chapter 2, verse 17, once Moses is in Midian and he runs into Zipporah, his future wife, and her sisters, they're at the well and they're trying to get water, and these Egyptians come and they're bothering them, and Moses drives them away. He says, and so in Exodus chapter 2, verse 17, it says, and they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds. Now she calls him an Egyptian because, as far as she's concerned, he's an Egyptian. Now she's a Midianite. She's not Hebrew. She's a Midianite. But he's dressed like an Egyptian. He talks like Egyptian. He looks like Moses is an Egyptian as far as he's concerned. An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of those shepherds, and he also drew water for us and watered the flock. And that's what Moses is, one who draws out. So he drew the water out of the well for us. In Exodus chapter 14, when Moses is delivering the people and he's helping them cross the water, the Red Sea, it says, then Moses, verse 21, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by strong east wind all that night, and he made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So now big wind is blowing, and he's dividing the water, and they're walking across the water, and Moses is with his hand raised, and he's drawing them out of the water toward the new land that they're supposed to go to. In Exodus chapter 17, verse 6, he says, behold, I will stand before, this is God talking to Moses, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He drew water from the rock. So his name is one who draws out, right? In Numbers chapter 20, verse 10, this is the second time, after the Ten Commandments have been given. Exodus is everything leading up to the Ten Commandments. Numbers is everything after the Ten Commandments. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock for you? Must I draw water out of the rock for you? Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. So he drew water out of the rock. Now he gets trouble for this time, which when we get to Numbers, we'll go over it. But a clue is him saying, must we bring water for you out of this rock? So he doesn't mention the God's in it at all. He totally gives himself the glory. Must we bring water out of this rock for you, me and Aaron? And that's why God shows up and says, you didn't holy me. You didn't give me any credit for what was going on. You acted like you were the one doing it. And that's why you're not going to go into the promised land. That's another confirmation of why, right? So God had already decided he wasn't going to the promised land, and he's showing Moses why he's made these decisions. Anyway, he draws one who draws out, and Moses kind of lives up to his name several times. He draws water out of the rock and draws the people out of Egypt, etc. Okay, Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown. So he's 40 years old. He's given back to Pharaoh's daughter at the age of 2. So for 38 more years, he's getting an Egyptian education. He looks like an Egyptian, talks like an Egyptian, walks like an Egyptian. What was that song? Anyway, and in fact, when he meets his wife, she says, an Egyptian came, right? So he's very Egyptian. Now he's getting into his heart. I think I want to go visit my people. In Acts chapter 7, verse 22, when Stephen is preaching his sermon before he was martyred, he says, and Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. So this helped him write Genesis, Exodus, especially the history in Genesis, because the library in Egypt was full of all the records of all these different nations and stuff. And so Moses is learning all this history and comparing it to the well, actually, he later, in the wilderness, he started hearing his own Jewish history, his own Israel history. but he's learning all these things in the Egyptian library. He's not learning Hebrew culture. He's aware he's Jewish. His mother doesn't lie to him, but he's learning everything Egyptian. And so when he writes Genesis, he's able to, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. This is because he's been learning all this history anyway. So in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11, it says, he went out to his brethren and he looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So in 40 years, he hasn't done this. The Egyptians have been beating the Jews, the Hebrews, and oppressing them, and he stayed inside and was learning more. And finally, at the age of 40, so this 38 years has been going on. So that's interesting in and of itself. He finally goes out and thinks, I know that I'm Hebrew, and I don't think I want to be Egyptian anymore, even though I talk like an Egyptian and walk like an Egyptian. I think I'm going to try to relate to my people. So he sees that an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, at one of his brethren. When Stephen talks about this, he's in Acts chapter 7, verse 23. He says, now when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brother and the children of Israel. So did God lead him to do this? I don't know. Because of what happened. God had a timing for when Moses was going to deliver his people. This wasn't the time. Perhaps he just wanted him to go out. And so if this was God saying, go out and look at your brethren, maybe he just wanted him to start to empathize with them, which he hadn't done for 40 years. Or maybe this was just something that came into his heart from Moses himself, because the time, sometimes we can judge from what happened. I don't know. I wonder if God was behind that. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24, it says, by faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So according to the writer of Hebrews, he is saying, I'm no longer going to be called an Egyptian. I'm going to relate to my Israeli brothers, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. So I'm giving up all my pleasures of Egypt, which he did, and I'm going to identify with the afflicted, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. So he hadn't heard of Jesus Christ. He's saying, esteeming the reproach of the Messiah that was going to come someday to deliver his people, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had spoken about. He's saying, I'm choosing that rather than all the rewards I can get in Egypt. So that's what how the writer of Egypt is describing it. So he goes out and he sees what's happening. The guy's being beaten, and then it's done. It's over. The Hebrew leaves, and the taskmaster, the Egyptian taskmaster, is all by himself now. So it's over. He didn't go break it up like he's about to do tomorrow. The next day, it's done. And it says in verse 12, so he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, so the guy who's being beaten is gone. This guy's all by himself. I know he's doing a crossword puzzle. He's all by himself. He killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So this is now, to me, this is a lot of pent-up anger, and this is Moses, his kind of hallmark. Moses has anger problems, and they're consistent throughout. In fact, it's God's the one who teaches him compassion in Exodus, teaches him to pray for his brethren and to intercede for them, as opposed to just be angry with them all the time. This rage that comes out of and murdering somebody, this is Moses. So maybe God led him to go out and just to observe so he can empathize with his brothers, because he'd been totally removed for them for 40 years. So look at what's going on with your brothers, because I'm going to call you to do something 40 years from now. So I need you to start looking at what's going on with him. It's his own rage that caused him to kill this guy. And he hides him in the sand. He buries him. So he's not proud of it. He didn't go brag to everybody, hey, I killed somebody. He buries him. So that means something. In Acts chapter 7, verse 24, it says, and seeing one of them suffer wrong, seeing one of his brothers suffer wrong, this is Stephen in his sermon, he defended and avenged him who was oppressed and struck down the Egyptian. Now, Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, verse 19, beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. Put it in its proper place. He says, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So you don't get to go around and become a posse and kill people because you think they've done wrong. So did Jesus learn the wisdom of the Egyptians when his parents took him down to, how long? That's all very good. Richard, you ask such good questions. Okay, I'll get into that later. So do not avenge yourselves. It says, and so Moses is in the wrong. You can tell by what happens next. In Exodus chapter 2, verse 13, it says, and he went out the second day. So he kills this guy, hides him. He goes out the second day, and behold, two Hebrew men are fighting now. So he says to the one who did the wrong. So he stops it, he breaks him up. Why are you striking your companion? Which is a lot of hypocrisy. You just killed somebody yesterday but anyway, why are you striking your companion? Now in Acts chapter 7, this is how Stephen describes this in his sermon. In verse 25, he says, for he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand. But they did not understand. So this is how he's thinking. His brethren would have turned to him and said, look, it's the deliverer. But that's not what they thought. They thought, look, it's the murderer. Because Moses wasn't supposed to do that at that point. There was a time when he was going to come down and be proclaimed deliverer when they were ready to go. But this was not the time. So sometimes we can have the right idea in our heart, but we're 40 years early. And that's very important. It's not that Moses wasn't going to ultimately be the deliverer. He had been saved from destruction. He knew in his mind, wow, everyone else around me was killed. There's a whole bunch of kids that were killed, but I was saved and brought it. So there must be some reason for this. I have Jewish friends whose parents were saved from the Holocaust, and that there's a whole generation of Jewish kids whose parents were saved from the Holocaust, who their parents tell them, there's some reason God saved me and not those other people. So you got to do great things. And a lot of them are doing great things. They just think there's some reason that I'm alive and everybody else was dead. So Moses is thinking that. I guess I'm supposed to be the deliverer. And so Stephen says he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, that they would go, oh, he's here, and applaud him. But they did not understand. And the next day he appeared to two of them as they were fighting and tried to reconcile them, saying, men, you are brethren. Why do you wrong one another? So Stephen makes it a little nicer. He just turned to one guy and says, why are you fighting him? But Stephen says, why are you wronging one another? Which is basically the same thing. In Exodus chapter 2, verse 14, then the guy says because the specific guy that Moses is talking to says, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Who do you think you are? Now, when you are at the right place at the right time, people will go, oh, God sent you. When you're at the right place, but it's the wrong time. And again, you could be at the right place. It's just the wrong timing. Or it could be the right time, but you're at the wrong place. God wants you over there and you're over there, right? It doesn't mean that you're off. Sometimes we just get ahead of God's plan. We're just ahead of it. And that's because we're anxious for something to happen. God is not anxious like we are. God knows when the fruit's going to be ripe. We want to eat it too soon because we think it's time. Well, this is time for this to happen. We've been waiting long enough. God knows when the time is. And so when we rush stuff, we don't get the results. So they're mad at Moses. Moses is mad at them because you're ahead of time. There's not all this anger when things are happening in the right time. So who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And so Moses is very upset because he thought he'd buried his Egyptian. God blew the sand off of his Egyptian. He thought nobody knew, nobody saw, but so God will blow the sand off your Egyptians when you're trying to hide something. God will just make it known because you need to deal with it. He wants us to deal with it. He didn't want Moses to kill somebody and get away with that. That wasn't God's plan. They knew what he did. Even Moses thought he was by himself, and he buried that Egyptian. They uncovered it. God blew the sand away, and they see this Egyptian, and Moses is embarrassed now. He's horrified. In Acts chapter 7, when Stephen is preaching his sermon, in verse 27, he says, "But he who did his neighbor wrong pushed him away, saying, 'Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday?'" And this, so here's what's happening to Moses, because it says in the next verse, so Moses feared and said, "Oh, surely this thing is known." This affects him profoundly because he finally, for the first time, is contacting his people. He was raised in Pharaoh's house, and that's all he knew was Egyptian culture. He's raised by Pharaoh's daughter from the age of 2 on. Jesus was raised by his parents, so even when they took him to Egypt, Richard, they're still educating him to the Jewish ways, and he's not in Egypt for a long time. But yeah, I'm sure he studied a little bit and learned about Egyptian culture, and wherever Jesus went, he learned about that culture. Um, but he always had his parents to guide him. Moses doesn't have his parents to guide him. He only has Pharaoh's daughter and the Egyptian scholars around him. So he makes his first attempt to reach out to his own culture, and they reject him. "Who do you think you are? And you're a murderer." And he's horrified. And I like, why? Because he's thinking, oh, they're going to applaud. And instead, it's like, who do you think you are? So this hurts him so badly because he already feels alienated from this culture anyway, right? His parents gave him away. That affects him. Uh, he was given away at birth, and his mother takes him and hands him over to an Egyptian woman. That affects him, right? So he already feels abandoned by that culture. And I say this because God has the hardest time later getting Moses to come back. 40 years later, so he hides for 40 years in the desert. It takes him 40 years to get over it. God's waiting for him to get over it, and comes to him and says, "I want you to go down there." It's like, no, I don't want to do it. Not because he's stubborn, because he just feels totally rejected, and they're going to hate me. He feels abandoned by his culture. When his parents gave him and handed him over to this Egyptian woman, he's raised an Egyptian. He feels like, gee, my own culture, my own family didn't want me. You can't help but feel that, even though, no, they were saving your life. That's not how you feel as the child. You feel, I was given away by my family, and my culture kind of rejected me. But I'll make an attempt to go back to my culture, and then they reject him immediately. "Who do you think you are? Are you gonna come to kill us?" And you got so they're totally misinterpreting in his mind his motives, what he's trying to do. Wait, I'm here to help you, and you're telling me. And so we just say, well, forget it then. I'm trying to help you, and and then you look how you're treating me, and so you wash your hands of it. And this really affects Moses to the point where he doesn't even talk to them later. Aaron is the one that talks to the Hebrew. Moses talks to Pharaoh. So God divides up the duties when you check, and he only talks to Pharaoh because he knows how to talk to Pharaoh. I was raised in this household. He knows exactly what to say, he knows how to present himself, but he doesn't know how to reach his own people. So God says, that's fine. I'll send Aaron with you. Aaron will talk to them. So we think that Moses was down there saying, yes, I've come to deliver. I'm talking about 40 years later. Nope. Moses never has a good relationship with the people. When he does talk to them, he smashes the Ten Commandments and he screams at them, and God has to teach him empathy for his people. God has to say, I'm going to blow them all up. And Moses, no, don't do that, God. God wasn't going to blow them all up, but he's trying to teach Moses to empathize with them because that's not the relationship that Moses has with his people. It's very interesting. But God used him anyway. God doesn't care. I'm going to use you. God decides. I'm going to use you. So you may not have a good relationship with those people, but I'm still going to use you to reach those people. So that's up to God. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because he's about to run away to Midian and be there for 40 years. And sometimes we need 40 years in the desert so we can get over our stuff so that God can use us. Sometimes we need to have that wilderness experience so that our minds can finally get right and all that emotion can finally get out of us so we can hear God correctly. So when it was time, God sets a bush on fire and says, "Okay, it's time now. I've given you enough time to get over it. Now I'm sending you back. This is the time that you should have been there." Even if God was the one who moved on his heart to go at least and observe his people just to see what they were going through because he had really no idea. God wasn't the one that was on him to murder that guy. So it's like you need to get all that anger out of you before I can use you. And that's what the 40 years in the wilderness, but we're going to start that next week. This, so in an hour or more at 11 o'clock, I'll be preaching. I'm in the book of Joshua, Joshua chapter 14, at my church. So for the three of you who Bible studies, Sunday school is not enough, feel free to watch at 11 o'clock on the Good Shepherd channel or on my Facebook page. And on Wednesdays, we're in the book of John. We're continuing the book of John. And so I appreciate all of you who uh, take the time to listen to the Bible study. But I'll stop there, and then I will continue next week. So thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you.